We're going to go ahead and get started with our Bible study. With our Bible study, the rise of a king, and we're still studying the character and life of David. And we're coming from 1 Samuel chapter 30, and we're almost at the end of chapter 30. And we're going, if we get there, we might be moving on into chapter 31. But by way of review, the Philistines have raided the camp, the homestead of David. And David had been away, scheming a little bit, fighting wars with the enemy, but yet he was also killing the enemy. So now the Philistines they haven't killed David's people, women, children, but they have captured the camp, and they have taken everything and burned everything down. All the time. David and his men have returned back. And in verse 21, this is by way of review. Somebody read verses 21 and 22.
Now David came to the 200 men who had been so weary that they could not follow David, whom they also had made to stay at the brook Besor. So they went out to meet David and to meet the people who were with him. And when David came near the people, he greeted them. Then all the wicked and worthless men of those who went with David answered and said, because they did not go with us, we will not give them any of the spoil that we have recovered, except for every man's wife and children, that they may lead them away and depart.
So did David win this battle? Did David win the battle against the Philistines? Absolutely, because he got a word from who? He got a word from God. That he got confirmation from God that he would win this battle. He did. So then he captured everything, and he was coming back. And some wicked and worthless men. Remember, he was already hooked up with people that were in debt and down and out, and just some guys that were on what you say? Some scandals anyway. So now their real hearts have come out. When David has come back, some of the men were so weary when they were running after these the men to try to capture them and defeat them. They were so weary when they got to this brook of Besor, they were too tired to go on. So they got assigned to take care of the all the equipment or whatever. So here they come back with all the spoils, and the wicked, worthless men, now they open up their mouths and they don't want to share. But David has a remedy for these wicked and worthless men. And in verse 23, this is what David says. Somebody read 23.
David said, my brethren, you shall not do so with what the Lord has given us, who has preserved us and delivered into our hands the truth that came against us.
So David is teaching these guys a lesson just immediately. He's thinking, well, no, just because they stayed behind and didn't actually stab anybody or kill anybody, they did their part in guarding the equipment that was left behind. So they did their part. You can't say that they didn't. So David has answered the worthless and what does it say? The wicked and worthless men by saying, my brethren, you shall not do so with what the Lord has given us. He made sure that he didn't take the credit for anything. He gave the credit to God. And he also said that God had preserved them, and he delivered all of them out of the hands of the truth that came against them that day. So David's heart is all about generosity, and it's just the opposite of what the wicked and worthless men were thinking. They were thinking just giving their wife and kids and send them on their way. They weren't even going to give them anything to travel with if they were to send them away. Now, how bad is that? Heartless. That's the right word. Heartless. Very heartless. So the question is, why do we fight and make judgment over things if the Lord gave them to us? Ungrateful. Ungrateful. Any other way we can describe right. You take credit, that's what I said too, I wrote down a little note, we take ownership of things. Any other ways to describe it?
Not understanding the ways of the Lord.
Not understanding the ways of the Lord, absolutely. Do you think those worthless, now let's just kind of stretch our imaginations a little bit. Do you think those worthless men, when David said, no, we're gonna share, do you think they were kind of happy about that? You were already bent on, trying to keep everything. Grumble, mumble, mumble. Under your breath or in your head. One.
Yeah, I didn't take it that was all of the wicked and worthless men.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't take it when I read it that was all of the ones that went with David.
Okay.
It's just a certain segment like you always got.
A little group of
Because it says, then all the wicked and worthless men of those who went.
went with them, yeah.
The wicked and worthless men of those.
Okay.
So, if it was 400 with them, it could have only been 30, 40, or 50.
But sometimes when people are, the negative things like they speak out the loudest sometimes, sometimes. Okay. And verse number 24. Somebody read that one.
For who will heed you in this matter? But as his part is who goes down to the battle, so shall his part be who stays by the supplies. They shall share alike.
That's a wonderful lesson. That's a wonderful lesson for all of us. Especially, let's bring it up to today. If, if one shares in a joy and in something great and grand, we all should share and be happy about it. That's the best way to be. Because if you start being, partial, who's to say what's fair? Just bless everybody. And then that way we can all realize that God was the one that did this for us and not we ourselves. Mm-hmm.
And if you want partnership to work, it's just like a marriage. You get married and you're gonna work, the wife is gonna stay home and take care of the house and raise the kids and whatnot. Then you go out and you work and you're like, okay, I made $100,000 this year, so I'm gonna give you 10 since you stay home and didn't do anything. I'm gonna keep the rest and pay bills, do this, what's left of mine. If you're into a partnership, it's just like it goes into a joint account and it's 50-50. She did her part, you did your part. And that's what David is saying here. Some of us went to battle, some of us stayed with the supplies, but we're a partnership and everybody's gonna share equally what we get. That's the only way you're gonna make it work.
That's right.
If not, the next time they're gonna be like, no, I'm not gonna do it because everybody's gonna want the choicest parts. Like
That's right. And, well, we'll get to it. Verse number 25.
So it was from that day forward, he made a statute and ordinance for Israel to this day.
Amen. So he just nipped this in the bud. He said, from now on, we're gonna share and share like much as possible. And when he made the statute, who could vote against it? It's just like the law. He made the law. I don't know if a statute is a law, but I'm thinking it's similar to a law. So he was the one he was still being in charge. He made it and said, so from this day forward, he made it a statute. So those that were trying to grumble or complain, they just had to nip that in the bud. Nip it in the bud. So now we're going to move on and see exactly how much plunder they collected. Because I'm telling you, when you read this, verses 26, 27, and 28, you're going to realize exactly how much plunder David and his men were able to accumulate. So somebody read 26.
Now when David came to Ziklag, he sent some of the spoil to the elders of Judah to his friends, saying, "Here is a present for you from the spoil of the enemies of the Lord."
Okay, hold it right there. Who did he give credit to? The Lord. Again, now that's the second time we've heard that, right? David, again, he sends out presents to his friends in Judah. And he didn't say, this is for me. This is for me and my crew. I'm sending this to you all, you know, because I did this great thing. He said, here's a present for you from the spoil of the, make sure they knew it came from the enemy, but it was the Lord who provided this. Okay, so we have to make sure we look at these words. So when we want to take credit for something that the Lord gave us, we have to think again. Verse 27.
So those who were in Bethlehem, those who were in the south, those who were in the field.
Okay, and go ahead and read verse 28.
Those who were in Simba, those who were in Eskimo.
Okay. So these are some of the places that David had kind of hung out in, and they kind of protected David. And David was just being generous to those who helped him. And we got to, ask ourselves the question: if there are those in our lives that helped us along, did we reach back or sideways and help somebody else? Help those same people that helped us along? Have we done that, or did we even say thank you, or thanks for helping me, or anything? Do we give anybody else the kudos for helping us? We might not be able to pay somebody, for sure, but we might could, go over and twist a light bulb in for somebody or something. Give somebody a ride somewhere or something. You could do something to show your gratitude. So this is what David was doing, showing his gratitude. Verse, anybody, any questions, comments? Verse 29.
Those who were in Rachel, those who were in the cities of the Jeremites, those who were in the cities of the Kenites,
Keep going.
those
Just read
who
to
were in
31.
Korah, those who were in Orashan, those who were in Athah, those who were in Hebron, and to all the places where David himself and his men were accustomed to rove.
So it named off a few of the places where David and his men went. But they didn't name everywhere, because in verse 31 it says, and to all the places where David himself and his men were accustomed to rove. So there were other places that he went to that are not even named. So you mean to tell me that they collected so much stuff from the enemy that he could share with all of these people, all of these cities, all of these folks in the cities, the leaders, he would give it to the leaders, I would assume, and they would disperse of it. So he was laying down with stuff, but he made sure that they knew it came from who? The Lord. And that the enemy was defeated, because God had already told him beforehand that he was going to be victorious. Our commentary says David divided his spoil into gifts for various friends back in Judah. These presents were sent to all the places where he was accustomed to rove. They evidenced that God had prospered him against his enemies. He might also have been trying to cement his friendships to gain support in his struggle against Saul, not realizing that Saul was now dead. And if we get that far, we're going to find out exactly how Saul died. And hopefully we're going to get to that point. So how can we equate David's gifts to our present day giving? I think we kind of answered that, but if anybody wants to comment more on it. How can we equate David's gifts to our present day giving? Ms. Bianca?
Excuse me, I'm sorry. It kind of makes me think of the parable that Jesus told about making friends with your unrighteous mammon, about I think the guy who was collecting the debt, and so he canceled half of everybody's debt so that when the unjust steward, so that when he was finally let go, he would have somewhere to go. And that's what this makes me think of. David probably knew at this point, because he already tried to go to war with the guy and he got turned around, but I think he could tell that his time in Ziklag was kind of winding down. It was no longer going to be safe for him to stay. So he started making friends with his money so that he would have somewhere that he could go when it was time to leave.
Okay. Back with his people.
You know, David gave to the people that helped him, and, you know, we do that today. I've helped people that helped me, you know, when I was, you know, up and coming, starting to do different things, and, you know, you're struggling, trying to make it, and you out there, people see you, you know, people see you working hard, and maybe you ain't got everything you need, and they help you get started, you know, like, yeah, okay, I remember that, and you know, you do. I mean, you know, you do. When you see people out trying, when you see people trying to do right, trying to live right and stuff like that, and they need a hand. You know, sometimes, you know, we want to turn and go the other way and say, well, I got mine, I'm going to keep it. But, you know, sometimes it's wise, you know, it's wise to, you know, help people when you see them trying to do right, to help them get up on their feet, because you realize that not only can you help them, but, you know, they're, you know, good people trying to live right, they're going to help other people also when they get on their feet. So by helping them, you're helping more than just them. You're helping the people that they're going to help. And that's kind of what, you know, David is repaying the people back, because the people that helped him, they were really helping Israel too.
Right. Any other comments?
That's another way of not putting any importance, like what I do is more important than what you do. We all play the part like a puzzle, and, you know, by everybody doing their part, the puzzle fits together. So it's one, you know, it's another way of not saying you're less than.
Right. So everybody feels appreciated and needed, and next time if anything happens, they're more than likely to help her out. So, oh, you really want to help me, so I'll help out next time. So now we're going to move over into 1 Samuel chapter 31. And so we're leaving this aspect of the scripture. We're going to find out, now we're going to flip back and see. Remember when Saul went to Zandor? Is it Zandor? Zandor? And we're going to go backwards to that the day after and see what happened with this fighting situation, with what happened with the Philistines and with all what was going on at that point. So we're kind of flip-flopping a little bit, but that's okay, because this is the way God wanted us to learn it. So here we go. Verse number 1, 1 Samuel 31 and 1.
Now the Philistines fought against Israel, and the men of Israel fled from before the Philistines, and fell slain on the mountain wall.
Okay, you got it out, yeah. All right. So remember, the Philistines are the enemy. They were fighting against Israel and the men of Israel. What did they do? They turned and did what? They ran. And so when I was looking up Mount Gilboa, it's in an area that's kind of hilly, got a lot of hills and stuff. You cannot fight your enemy with your back facing them and you run in the other direction. They were not standing foot to foot and trying to fight. They were running away. And so then we're going to see what happens because they were running away. Verse 2.
Then the Philistines followed hard after Saul and his sons, and the Philistines killed Jonathan, Abinadab, and Malchishua, Saul's sons.
Right on. And so now, okay, the Philistines were just bent on getting the Israelite, the men of Israel. They're going to kill them anyway. We're trying to kill them. They're trying to kill Saul. Trying to kill the enemy. they figured the Israelites were their enemy. And so the Philistines were trying to kill Saul, but Saul wasn't out there alone. He was with his troops and his sons were there. But it only named 3 sons. He had 4. Only named 3. And one of them was David's best friend. Which one was that? Jonathan. And so Jonathan was killed along with his other 2 brothers in the fight and in the war. And verse 3. We'll come back to Jonathan in just a second. But verse 3.
The battle became fierce against Saul. The archers hit him, and he was severely wounded by the archers.
Okay, it was called out for the archers. And you know, the archers, they just sent their bows not straight ahead, but up and arched them over. They knew how to make those arrows go in an arch. And so you've seen some of these movies. I mean, they can make it look like anything, but you can imagine the arrows just going down, and whoever it hit, it hit. It could hit somebody in the eye, hit somebody in the neck, hit somebody in the side. It could just, the point was kill off who you could, no matter which way, no matter who was in the way, too bad. And so the archers hit him, and he was severely wounded by the archers. And so we talked about Saul. Saul was wounded at this point. And remember, Saul had fought many battles. He won some, lost some.
Yes.
And he was the king of Israel for what, 40 years. So he had been in a whole bunch of battles. So by now, Saul was kind of an older man, out there fighting with some of these younger men. Yes, some of these, some that are really itchy to really get them. So then, but we already know, because we've seen in Scripture, we already know that Saul is going to have, Saul is going to have to lose the kingship.
Well, and like you said, Saul had been in many battles, but we also know, like Peter's lesson, that Saul maybe he didn't properly prepare for this battle, because the night before, he was with that witch of Endor or Seance or whatever, he was dressed and had a couple guards with him, and he was trying to hide. He had to bring back up Saul.
Right.
And he didn't bring back up Saul to try to find out a battle plan and anything. He was worried about David. He wasn't even concentrating on being ready for this battle here. He was bringing Samuel back. And Samuel told him, Lord said tomorrow about this time, people come to an end. So he should have been getting ready for this battle instead of trying to worry about David and getting somebody to bring Samuel back up to try to get some dirt on David or something.
That we already know that contacting somebody that's doing witchcraft is against what God said do in the first place. So it's already wrong. What were you going to say, Peter? Any other comments? Okay. So Saul was hit. And he wasn't just hit. I mean, it didn't have a nick. It said he was severely wounded by the archers. So we don't know, more than one arrow got him, but we know that one severely wounded him, at least one did. So verse 4.
Then Saul said to his armor, draw your sword and thrust me through with it, lest these uncircumcised men come and thrust me through and abuse me. But his armor bearer would not, for he was greatly afraid. Therefore Saul took his sword and fell on it.
Okay. So Saul was laying there wounded. And his thought was on himself. It wasn't calling out on the Lord, Lord save me, help me. He was thinking about himself in a severely wounded state. So instead of calling on the Lord for anything, he tells his armor bearer, who was his right-hand man, who was his bodyguard almost, who carried Saul's weapons and stuff. He said, draw your sword and thrust me, kill me. In other words, kill me. and list these uncircumcised men, which anybody that's not an Israelite is an uncircumcised person. Unless they come and thrust me. In other words, he was worried about his enemies coming in and, torturing him. Yeah. And they was worried about them abusing him. But he wasn't thinking all about that when he was running after David and trying to abuse David, was it? When he was throwing the spears at David, he wasn't thinking there was abuse there. So,
He told David one time, you're a stronger man than I am.
he did say that.
Yeah, he did, because he got that chance on, every time he got changed, he tried to kill David.
That's right.
But here, now, he take no chance to be uncircumcised. That's all, gotta kill him.
Brother Willie?
Yeah, I think especially in this passage, Saul, in our vernacular, well, the way that I see it, when you knew, and I don't know if this was before or after, that God had taken his throne, I don't know, because I'm not much on the Old Testament, but I think he knew that he was at his end anyway. And, a lot of times we want to put it on somebody else, the uncircumcised, just like me in my past, being in drugs and stuff, I always put it on, when I woke up in the morning, I cursed the drug dealer. Well, the drug dealer didn't do that to me. I did it to myself. So what I think he saw his end coming. And then he asked his armor bearer to kill him. That's just like me going to my wife and say, hey baby, just for me. Don't do it.
Don't do that.
And now I don't know the context before this because I got here a little late, but he knew his end.
He knew it because
He knew his end was coming.
he was told he was
Right. So he said, well, just like people commit suicide, they won't do it themselves, believe it or not, because I've studied it. The people know that their end is near, they do it themselves, because I've been to that door, and but that's what I think he was saying then. In other words, he was a coward.
Okay.
He was a coward.
There's a conjunction.
You kill me. Now, what were they gonna do to the armor bearer?
I'll tell you what they were gonna do, but we're gonna let Catherine speak first.
Okay.
I'm looking at this and I just see that this is just an act of war. Because, even with soldiers in this day and time, if they get wounded, they don't want the enemy to come and capture them and put them in prison or do what have you. So he was a warrior, and he knew the consequences of war, of fighting, that he might be killed anyway. So he wanted the person to kill him because that would have been a friendship killing. It's almost like,
Is that right?
mercy killing.
Is that right?
I don't know. I just think it's a part of war. I just think it's a part of war.
Anybody, any other comments about it?
Well, it seems he was mortally wounded. I mean,
Yeah.
he knew he was gonna die.
Die,
He was
yeah.
mortally wounded, he knew it. He knew he was gonna die. But still, somebody taking your life is different than you dying on your own.
Exactly. And because if they would have tortured him, he said, and abused me, and prolonged his death, kill me quickly,
Him killing himself or his armor bearer killed him, she would have been killed if he knew he was gonna
I
die.
understand that, but not going through the abuse of them, it's a different thing, to me, it would be a difference, because I would rather be killed at the hand of my friend who kills me quickly, you know what I'm saying? Instead
Well,
of
not me, because I
someone
don't
who
want you to make that decision.
Listen, y'all gonna have to comment.
We get off point because, he could pray to God to save him, God
Yeah.
saved him, he just took the matter just like
It
that.
was all, he was already.
Killing somebody else.
Right, go ahead, Ms. Bianca.
That's what I mean, but you still take out the God equation.
Yeah.
For Saul's issue from the very beginning,
Right.
he never asked God, even until the time of his death. He never asked God. God can work all kinds of miracles. God can always turn things around, but you have to ask him. And he just, to the very end, he refused to ask God.
So he had no faith in God.
And he believed that they would torture him, which is what he
He
would
was
have
done.
done. So it was that perceived death that he was gonna get.
So, yeah.
That's why we need to call on Almighty. Still, a lot of times today we call our lucky.
Yeah.
This and that. No such thing, lucky is like our God, they can't help you. But all good like as was said, or not all Saul, all one Lord, but he refused.
It don't seem like the Lord was even on his mind.
No.
And I saved my only hide.
But it says, and then, look at the armor bearer, it says, but his armor bearer would not, for he was greatly afraid. And so why do you think the armor bearer was afraid to kill Saul? Saul is the king, remember? He was loyal to it, he was given king.
The king was dead when everybody come and they find out what happened to him.
He survived, but he was there, he was gonna
The king said, kill him, and I killed him.
Right. And so Saul was so intent on ending his own life, he could you do that? I mean, therefore Saul took a sword and fell on him.
Not godly.
It was.
I said, it's not godly.
So verse 5. Anybody else have any other comments about that? I'm sorry, Tabitha, I didn't see you.
Oh, I was just,
Barbara's head is in the way.
I guess in the next verses to follow, the repercussions of your actions. It never tells you how the sons died or whatever, they just say they died in battle. But because of Saul's decision through this entire thing, his whole family line is messed up because of his sin.
Yeah. So go ahead and read verse 5.
and when his armor bearer saw that Saul was dead, he also fell on his sword and died with him.
That's what you call it. What are your thoughts on this type of loyalty?
That's
They're loyal to his king.
My thing, it said like, he didn't want his people to die. Saul was gonna die anyway, but he was gonna be one killed.
Yeah.
But when he found out he was dead, he just fell on the lonesome.
Yeah.
I think they would have, I think he's thinking like Saul, if Saul dies, he'll kill me too.
Yeah.
Yeah, because that was his job.
By association.
Yeah.
Yeah, by association.
It's all in God's plan.
Go ahead.
I don't understand the order of things, but in my vernacular, if my king or the person that I was following, or not, Saul, what he was, if he did. That's all calling me name. But, in my, but I understand the hierarchy of what the army was. I think his armor bearer, he was so close to him that, he could have been scared. He could have been scared. But when Saul killed himself, I'd have just joined in the army.
All right, then.
No, but I wouldn't have killed myself. But that's another vernacular. That's just another, but anyway.
So if the armor bearer had killed Saul and he survived and got back,
He
they
would
would
probably
have
got
killed
killed.
him anyway.
Right.
Because he made a vow to protect the king.
Yeah.
Which is what the armor bearer.
And, like today's time we're living in, there's a trend that's going on. Relative to be responsible for what you did, kill yourself. There's still a lot that's going on now. But in our time, even like, the New Testament, there's a second time we have to face Jesus at the end here because right in that count. But I just looked at this, it reminded me of a time, you see so much, somebody do wrong, well, things always kill yourself and stuff is all.
Not all over, because that is not the end. So verse 6, let's move on to verse number 6.
So Saul and his 3 sons, his armor bearer, and all his men died together that same day.
The whole family, just like there, Captain said, the whole line of people died that same day.
That's right.
Verse number 7.
And when the men of Israel who were on the other side of the valley and those who were on the other side of the Jordan saw that the men of Israel had fled and that Saul and his sons were dead, they forsook the cities and fled, and the Philistines came and dwelt in them.
So they just left. They ran, they were afraid, and they left and ran. So the Philistines just came in and just kind of took over. Just took over. What do you think about that? Do you think you would have fled? The enemy is coming at you. What are you going to do? Stand and fight or flee?
The army has been defeated, the army that particular area has been defeated, so. They were basically probably defenseless. They might have put the muscle together or something, but they basically, kind of defenseless.
So that was their defense.
They had enough defense to protect themselves, so they fled.
And I look at it too, a lot of times, these hidden people are people that went on the lower side, and they see who the Lord was against them. God would always, would have the battle won anyway. And, that sounds like who's on the Lord's side. And a lot of those hidden people, even though they believed in our God, but they recognized God was God when they seen they was being defeated.
Yeah.
Well, the Lord's on their side, we can't fight against them. And the Israel won a lot of their battles because the Lord was on their side.
So go ahead and read verse 8.
So it happened the next day when the Philistines came to strip, they sent the slain that they found Saul and his 3 sons fallen on Mount Gilboa.
So evidently it was getting towards nightfall and nobody could see who was dead. But the next day when it was daylight, the Philistines was walking around to see who was dead, who the arrows got. And so one of the people was Saul. Not just Saul, but his 3 sons. And they had fallen on what? Mount Gilboa. So that's where the place where they had died. And this was a good day for the Philistines, or so it seemed. Sometimes the Lord will seem to allow the enemies to have a victory, but it's a short-lived victory.
Yes.
A season, that's right, a short-lived season of victory for the enemy. So they were so happy. This is what the enemies did. Verse number 9.
And they cut off his head and stripped off his armor and sent word throughout the land of the Philistines to proclaim it in the temple of their idols and among the people.
Thank you for reading that. Now, if you've seen any news within the last 5 to 6 weeks, we've seen where people are beheaded. We don't see the actual video taping of it, but you can get the picture of what they're doing. You can see the look on the people's faces and everything. But these people are already dead. Saul and his sons were already dead. But for them to cut off their heads, that seems very extreme. That's how much they really hated Saul. But they did it for a reason. And they made sure that the word got back to the rest of the folks, the other Philistines, and the people in the land. And they wanted to proclaim that this is a victory. And they took ownership of this to proclaim it in the temple of their idols and among the people. So they wanted to hang this head, well, I'm getting ahead of myself. They wanted to take a trophy. Y'all heard of people that, that kill people and they take trophies. They might take a finger or an ear or something. They took Saul's head, cut it off, and they stripped him of his armor. And the armor, remember, Saul's armor was a special kind of armor. I mean, he was the king. His armor was not like everybody. It was just probably heavy and expensive and looked different and heavier or whatever. But anyway, it was like a prize to them. His head was like a prize to them because they attributed to their God, to their gods. You see where it says idols? To proclaim it in the temple of their idols. That's your hand?
And also it was to, have proof like, lame man, lame man. He's been lame all his life and people that saw him, so it was, indisputable miracle. They wanted to have an indisputable proof for people to see Saul is dead, here's his head.
That's right.
It's not going to go say Saul is dead. Saul is dead and here's his head. And once, several 100,000 people see that, it goes throughout the land, you don't have to think he's dead, we know he's dead, he's all dead,
That's kind of the same thing with him.
Yeah. It was almost like the opposites.
Well, he's such a bad guy, but when God's on the side, nobody can be that bad, they can't be killed.
Oh, Jackie, I want you to open your Bible to 1 Samuel and look up chapter 1. Because I want us to see something that's kind of interesting. I'm ready to Jackie do the work here. 1 Samuel chapter 1 and look at verses 5 through 10. Just read that out for us. Please, ma'am. 1 Samuel chapter 1 verses 5 through 10.
And though he loved Hannah, he would give her only one choice portion, because the Lord had given her no children. So Peninnah,
Wait a minute, are you on the right place?
You said chapter, chapter 1, 5.
Verses 5 through 10.
Right. But Hannah,
Maybe I wrote down the wrong.
and
that's what verse 5 starts from.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Which one verse 1 starts?
Well, I may have written down something wrong, but I thought I was writing down right. 1 Samuel 5,
I've been
chapter
reading,
1.
I was trying to.
Second Samuel.
2 Samuel.
Second, okay.
oh, second,
I wrote down wrong.
Second Samuel, chapter 1.
Second Samuel chapter 1:5. How do you know Saul and Jonathan are dead?
Yeah, that's it, sorry.
Right.
David demanded of the young man. The man answered, I happened to be on Mount Gilboa, and there was Saul leaning on his spear with the enemy chariots and charioteers closing in on him. When he turned and saw me, he cried out for me to come to him. How can I help? I asked him. Keep going.
Is that the verse 10?
Oh, he responded, who are you? I am a Amalekite. Amalekite, I told him. Then he begged me, come over here and put me out of my misery, for I am in terrible pain and want to die. So I killed him, the Amalekite told David, for I knew he couldn't live. Then I took his crown and his armband, and I have brought them here to you, my Lord.
Okay, now that goes to show us that it took Saul a long time to die. he might have thrust himself in, you know, in the stomach or wherever with one spear, but he was, it was, you know, when you bleed to death, that's a slow go. That's a slow go. And so so people would come on the battlefield to rob those that were dying or already dead. So a robber came upon Saul, and Saul was still alive at that point. And he was begging this man to, you know, come and kill me, and he did. So whatever was going to happen to the armor bearer, if he had gone ahead and killed Saul, he was going to get the same thing that this robber got, which was David had that robber killed. Because what did it say? It said that he had taken the crown from Saul and his armor, yeah, his bracelet or whatever it was. Those were the choice prizes. When the Philistines got to Saul, they got the second best, which was his armor and his and also his head. So they got the second best. They didn't get the crown and everything. They got his head and the armor. So Saul was dying slowly. So we realized that it was an agonizing death that Saul was experiencing, just like our Lord experienced an agonizing death. But Saul's death was all for the wrong reasons. It was for his faithlessness in God. But Jesus' death was for his faithfulness in God. Amen? Amen. Thank you, Jackie. I'm sorry I had the wrong family. And thank you, Miss Bianca, for getting it straight. And so in verse 8, let's read verse 8. Excuse me. Verse 9.
And they cut off his head and stripped off his armor. 10. Then they put his armor in the temple of the Ashtaroths, and they fastened his body to the wall of Bethshan.
They went ahead and did what they wanted to do, which was they wanted to humiliate the Israelites, really. So they put his armor in their idol's temple, just like David did with Goliath's stuff, you know. And they fastened his body to the wall at Bethshan. And so it was another way of, even though the body was dead, they still wanted to humiliate him, you know. So Saul was humiliated anyway. He was afraid of that, and he still got humiliation just for his body being up there. But poor Jonathan, Jonathan was faithful to his daddy throughout the whole thing. And he was David's friend. We said that, and some people would consider Jonathan to have been a hero. But he was also Saul's oldest friend, but he was also loyal to his daddy. And being loyal to his daddy, you know, he still suffered, you know, a grave type of death. But he was still, like my sister said, he was a warrior, so he was there to the very end in anyway. Okay? So verse number 11. Somebody read verse 11.
Now when the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead heard what the Philistines had done to Saul, 12 and 13, or yeah, 12. All the valiant men arose and traveled all night, and took the body of Saul and the bodies of his sons from the wall of Bethshan. And they came to Jabesh and burned them there.
So it was some brave men. They decided, this is not going to happen, because Saul helped the Jabesh Gilead. He helped those people that won one of his first battles. He helped them. Go ahead.
Oh, too, I like it how the whole overall theme through this thing is that people don't want to hurt Saul. They all are trying to help him. David doesn't want to kill Saul. The armor bearer doesn't want to kill Saul. Even when Saul is dead, they don't go, oh, well, he was a horrible king, even though they knew he was a really bad king. They still bury him. They take him off the wall, even though they know they might be killed by the Philistines living in the area. Everyone is respecting God's own, but God's own couldn't respect everyone else.
Yes, that's right. Absolutely. Put it in a nutshell. Absolutely. And they were brave, because it said they were valiant. In verse 12, it said they were valiant men who arose. And then they didn't just, you know, they knew it was dangerous to go during the day. They went what? At night. They traveled at night. A lot of stuff happens at night, y'all. Yeah. And so nobody was thinking that anybody would take the bodies down at night. And so they came in and took the bodies down. And you know, I don't know if this was a form of, you know, a thing that was done all the time with them burning the bodies, but the bodies were so damaged anyway. The bodies was, you know, stabbed, and no doubt birds would come and, you know, vultures and turkey vultures or whatever had probably picked on and ate some of them, ate part of them or whatever, but it was enough of body there for them to burn. So, and plus, you know, by now, the bodies probably stinking, beginning to smell. So they went ahead and burned them. And that was really, and giving them generally a proper type burial. Because they like Philip said, they were really trying to respect Saul. Even though he was the bad king and he did some really crazy things, and God told him he was gonna die, everything, they still respected him.
I think it goes back to like David said, he wouldn't go against Saul because he was God's anointed one, even though Saul didn't do what was right. But David respected him because God had anointed him. They needed a king. So Israel complained about the king until Samuel just gave him a king.
Absolutely.
But David respected him as God's anointed one. Saul didn't respect him.
Saul was into himself. And did you read 13, Brother Philip?
I did not. Then he took their bones and burned them under the tamarisk tree at Jabesh and fasted 7 days.
So they still did an honorable thing towards Saul. And because fasting is part of the mourning and grieving process, and they didn't have time to, you know, go find them a cave to bury them in or whatever, a tomb to bury them in. So they buried them under a tamarisk tree at Jabesh. And they went ahead and fasted 7 days. And so let's read, let's see who's on. Catherine, can you read this commentary at the bottom?
When the men of Jabesh Gilead heard of this, they marched the 10 miles to recover the bodies. The remains were given a proper burial under the tamarisk tree at Jabesh. These men had not forgotten how Saul had saved them from the Ammonites in his first major battle as king in chapter 11. Cremation was not generally practiced in Israel. Perhaps it was used here because the bodies had been so mutilated. Also, it would prevent the Philistines from the possibility of ever dishonoring the bodies still further. God's judgment on Saul was now complete. Many times Saul had tried to arrange for David to be killed by the Philistines, but he himself was the one to eventually fall before them. David received the throne as appointed by God. Saul received the just recompense of his deeds, according to the justice of the Lord, to which David also committed him.
And it was so, you know, it's so amazing how God does things completely, because who was next in line to receive the throne if Saul, just only Saul had died, who was next in line to receive that throne? Jonathan would have been, but Jonathan died in the battle too. So the Lord does things completely. When he says somebody's gonna do something, when he appoints somebody to do something, or he says this is gonna happen, it's gonna happen. You better believe it. It might not happen in the time that you think, but it's gonna happen.
But Jonathan had already recognized David
Yeah.
as the next king.
He sure did.
But even though his daddy didn't do things right, he always was one to go between to try to let David know that his daddy wasn't doing right, you know, and bring them closer together when Saul moved to do David wrong. Jonathan played a great part there, but he was on the wrong side.
Right.
His daddy just went on the Lord's side.
Daddy was on the Lord's side. Yes, Miss Tabitha?
But you know, Jonathan had that thing with his dad when he wasn't supposed to eat any of the honey because his father said whoever eats it will die, and he did it anyways. Technically, he deserved that too.
All right, Miss Tabitha. Any other comments? Well, thank you all for participating and coming out for Monday Night Bible Study. So we finish this and we'll move on to the next. Thank you.
We stand up, we like this thing, everyone will come out. And let us keep our pastor prayers tonight, and get well soon. I'm going to ask Brother Lucas, if you don't mind, to give us a close prayer.